Okay, I want to welcome all of you to today's NASCA webinar exploring how state conservation agencies are calculating the value of conservation investments. This webinar is being recorded. It'll be available on NASCA's YouTube channel. We have two presentations today, but I encourage everybody, all of our attendees today, to share examples of similar exercises that you've done in your state. This webinar will last up to 60 minutes, but there'll be plenty of time for questions and sharing. If you'd like, you can put your questions into the group chat, or you can save them for the end. We're going to let both presentations go, and then we'll have questions all at once at the end. And I'd like to remind everybody to stay muted during the presentations. Let me introduce both sets of presenters. Justin Hansen is the Assistant Director for Regional Operations for Minnesota's Board of Water and Soil Resources, Bowser, and Uday Singh is Bowser's Outcomes Coordinator. They're going to talk about the work that they're doing in communicating conservation investments in their state. And James Martin is the Director of Division of Soil and Water Conservation at the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. James will share information about Virginia's annual agricultural needs assessment that estimates funding needed to implement best management practices across the Commonwealth. This effort has led to rapid growth in funding in Virginia's agricultural cost share program. He will also talk about some of the tools that are used to estimate the ecosystem services benefit derived from this substantial public investment. So with that, I want to hand things over to Justin and Uday to talk a little bit about Bowser's work.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And thanks for the opportunity to come in and talk about some of the work that we're doing in Minnesota, but also learn from others that are doing really good work. Outcomes is a huge part of our work and our impact. It's so much of our work is around public funding, right? And when we're working with the public's funds, we have to be really good stewards of that money and assure that that the return on investment that the public is getting is not just impactful, but understood. And we need to be able to articulate what the public benefit is for those, all of us, right? That pay our taxes. And so, we spend a lot of time in our work, Uday and I, as our outcomes coordinator, and me as an assistant director, developing policy that assures that the public is getting what they pay for. So we describe outcomes in a lot of different ways. In natural resource work, conservation work, landowners served is a big part of that. It's a driver for us. Projects completed, are some of these other obvious things, and obviously the resources impacted on the back end of the projects that we complete. But one of the things that's less obvious to us because we do resource work, but perhaps most important, is just understanding the economic impact of conservation in the state or a community, a watershed, the nation, right? I mean, the economic impact is such a big part of that. That's the assurance that the investment that you're making, gets bounced around, and that other people are having, a good experience with that funding, not just from a resource impact, but actually our days or our daily life. So I'm a natural resource guy. I'm not an economist, but we are fortunate in Minnesota to have people that are also thinking about outcomes the same way we are. And we teamed up a couple of years ago with Natural Resource Conservation Service and our SWCD association. We were having this exact conversation, and it came out through that discussion that there was a tool that was available, a modeling tool that we could use to import our data of money that's actually spent on conservation in Minnesota, and we could do some analysis and better understand what that return on investment and what that local impact was. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that model, and Dr. Singh is going to take us through sort of how that process works and some of the results that we've had. So Uday, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Justin, and thank you, everyone. Uday Singh, I'm the Modeling and Outcomes Coordinator here. By training, I'm an engineer, but I've been doing a lot of modeling and outcomes and project management work. And at the state agency, I'm pretty excited to work across other agencies to look various aspects of our work. We produce so much output, but then how does that output relate to the outcomes? So this work was already in the hopper before I joined. The only one thing I'm missing here is I don't have the slide for the data organization, which I did for all SWCDs, and so income and expenditure data. So that was a major effort from our part. As you can see, the data was arranged by us, and then the NRCS economist, who is the expert on the impact analysis for planning. This is the model. This is basically a input output model. It's a lump model. We call it a multiple factors into it, and it traces the flow of goods and service through the economy. So it has various aspects of direct or indirect costs, and I'll cover those. And this typically used to analyze the impacts of influx of government or private expenditure into community. And then what does it do for consumption, net output, and then jobs. So these are just three things this model, when you talk about it, because input output model, you look for direct effect, and these are the set of experiments applied to the input output multiplier. And then it is also one of the most production changes or expenditure that made by producers and consumers. And the indirect effect this model looks into, like what are the indirect effects are the business to the business purchases in the supply chain. So let's say Bowser provide money to Soil and Water Conservation District to buy an implement, and then it goes to a dealer, and this is how that whole supply chain, how does it work from? And again, from all the way from it stands from the initial industry input purchases to what outcomes it has on the ground. And then there are some induced effect of that whole supply chain. We looked at the induced effects are the values, stemming from household spending of a labor, and then take the savings and consumer income. So with this, what 2021 data for state of Minnesota tells us these three values. I hope everybody can see that this was the total expenditure, and I think it is in millions, 114 million. And the direct impact to the Minnesota was around 76. So the total added value is 132. And then output is 203 million. And what it relates to is a output multiplier of 1.8. So every dollar that went into the conservation work produced 1.8 outcome. And as a result of that whole direct and indirect input to the model, whatever the induced thing is, like altogether 248 direct jobs were created. And these are the folks who get paid somehow. And then 893 are the indirect jobs. So these are all the supply chain that goes into the system, whether it's a dealer or a fertilizer distributor and all those things. So what it tells us, so this slide is kind of like final results. What we looked at is like the direct effect, employment, indirect effect, and then the induced effect and total effect. And that is in terms of employment. That's what those numbers are. And then there's a labor income, and then value added, and that is the output. So this is a very simple way. And again, if people are interested, we can have another webinar in the future where the NRCS economist and who knows, other state agencies may have their area NRCS economist and have them come in and give you more detail about the model. I'm not an economist by training. I do know modeling, so I do understand what input, what output, and what the lump parameter models are. So for us, this became a very good tool for Minnesota Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts, as well as even for our agency to use this as a tool to communicate to the local folks, like all the work we do it is not only what we provide into, but it also create indirect and induced effect in the economy.
Yeah, we spend so much of our time talking and thinking about, the landowners that we serve and, the resources that are being served. And, it's just not, we don't always take credit for all the work that we do, right? I think that's a real common thing in conservation as well. And, even just to understand what that economic impact is not second nature or something that we think a lot about. But if you go back and think in real terms back home, when a dollar gets moved around in your local community, it bounces around in several different ways. And it's, conservation has strengthened communities in a lot of way. And is part of the fabric of our communities in so many ways. If you're an outstate or if you're ag and ranch land where you have less populated areas, then we really certainly see this more directly in our experience. But I think it's important because for some folks, the message and the value of conservation is the natural resource work. But there's a number of people that I come in contact with from a policy perspective. It's part of my job at Bowser to work on policy, and you have to meet people where they are. And for some folks, conservation is more important because of the economic value that it has and less maybe about the resource. And so we just thought it was important to make sure that we're paying attention to all of the impacts that come from the conservation work that is done. I will say we've been really intentional about the data as well. I know sometimes people look at data and sort of scratch their head and wonder if this is the accuracy and whether they can trust it, right? Which is a really important part of this process. Dr. Singh and his staff have worked on being really intentional about using data that comes right off the books of all of our soil and water conservation districts. So taking those financial reports, getting those integrated, and then being really thoughtful about some of the other factors that get included into that model. And your information going in is really important to make sure that you trust the results that you get on the back end. And so we're really confident that we can hand this off and share this with partners, with legislators, with district board members, with just friends, neighbors, right? It's all the folks that you sort of come in contact with that want to be able to see themselves in the value of the work that you're all doing. So I think with that, Uday, if you have any closing
statements. Only one closing is that as a next step, because this was became such a, there's a lot of outreach. We have presented, Sam and myself have presented to various groups. We are in the process of doing the same analysis for our 2023 data. So we had thought that we'll do it every year, but then we decided every 2 years because our budget cycle is also every 2 years. So Cameron, who is my teammate, myself have, again, because I had the experience of putting the data together. This time we divided. Cameron put the initial, then I went ahead and did the QA/QC, and then the data is now in NRC's hand. So hopefully in 6 months from now, we might have 2023 data analysis to share with you guys.
Getting a lot of information summed up into one metric, right? Like it's a lot of information in the background to get to something that's easily described. I think with that, Mike, we're probably as interested in questions to make sure that we hit the mark with folks. So we'll get it out of the way and let the next presentations go, and we'll plan on sticking around for the whole hour, obviously.
Sounds good. And just a reminder for the group, if you have questions, drop those in the chat box now if you'd like, or you can hold on to those until the end. But good stuff there from Minnesota. With that, we're going to move on to James to talk about work being done in Virginia.
All right, thanks, Mike. Let's see. Let's get a share going. All right, you seeing the presenter view or the the full view? Which one do you guys see now?
We can see the full view, James.
Awesome. All right. I'm James Martin with the Division of Soil and Water Conservation here in Virginia. We administer our state's agricultural cost share program. And our program is really in large part driven by work to restore the Chesapeake Bay, the largest watershed in Virginia, though it only represents about 60% of the Commonwealth's land area. A lot of work that I'll be sharing originates from the Chesapeake Bay program, which is the multi-state partnership along with EPA that works on the clean water and other goals related to Chesapeake Bay restoration. So let's jump on in. So as opposed to Justin and Uday, who talked a little bit about the value of the actual investment of, say, cost share dollars implemented on the ground and the impact that has through the economy, I wanted to talk a little bit about other ecosystem service benefits that are derived from the work that we do. And here's kind of the process as I think about it for how you go about doing that. First, of course, you need to determine the ecosystem service or services that are of interest. And there may be different interests depending on who you are. Then you identify the factors that can influence how much of those ecosystem service benefits are produced. And then you do something, right? You make a change, you implement a practice on the landscape, measure and track what's done. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Then you have to start quantifying the incremental change in those ecosystem services of interest. And then the hard part comes in valuation, right? Trying to put dollar figures on those things that the public benefits that we derive through the ecosystem that we're creating. So in terms of determining ecosystem services of interest, let me, I'll drop a link in the chat once I'm done presenting that gives you all of these references that I will have in the presentation, as well as some other resources that might help you down this path to start thinking more about quantifying and valuing ecosystem services. This study by Rossi et al. In 2023 looked at these 11 best management practices, determined that about 45 different ecosystem services could be derived from the implementation of those practices, and impacted a number of different user groups, about the same number, about 45 different user groups that they identified. Now, each of these user groups may value some of these ecosystem services differently. So this is where it starts getting complicated. So let's take an easy example. First, let's think about buffers. I think we all have programs to implement riparian buffers. Here's just a few of the ecosystem service benefits of buffers. Obviously, when you convert agricultural land to a buffer area along a riparian zone, you reduce fertilizer applications. Excess nutrients can be taken up by those plants. You reduce runoff of those pollutants, as well as sediment. You can create pollinator habitat, attenuate floods, sequester carbon, create wildlife corridors, stabilize stream banks and stream temperatures, create additional fish habitat. Yeah, so, and I'm sure that's not even all. Aesthetics, for example, is always an ecosystem benefit that can be considered. So which of these are we really interested in? Well, it depends on who your interested groups are, but the next step is to identify those factors about the installation of a buffer that can influence and maximize the benefits that you're going to derive. So, generally speaking, wider buffers are better. Certainly they are from wildlife corridor perspective and habitat. Forest buffers would be better than herbaceous buffers if you're interested in carbon sequestration. A diverse multi-trophic buffer might be best if you're interested in habitat. If you're interested in pollution reductions, nutrient and sediment reductions, making sure there's sheet flow into that buffer is really important to get the filtering benefits from the upland. Really, all of these things are important, but site-specific conditions are what really drive the day. So these benefits can be highly variable spatially. It's also, you also have to consider that these benefits often have trade-offs. If you're interested in habitat and carbon, how do you balance the density of your tree planting with other understory plantings, or maybe you're interested in pollinator habitat, right? How do you best plant a buffer for pollinators? Probably not the same as you would if you're trying to maximize carbon sequestration. So there's these types of trade-offs that you have to deal with, and often there's additional science needed to understand those causal relationships between the actions we take and the measurable benefits that might be derived. So as I said, most of us have programs that establish buffers. We are doing something. We're implementing a buffer on the landscape. What do we need to measure? Length, width, land use before you establish the buffer, land use after you establish the buffer, right? Exactly what was planted, the location, and the date. And then there may be other specifics that you need to measure on site based on the ecosystem services that you're interested in. Vegetative species, planting densities, the existence of threatened, endangered, or a target species that you're interested in. If you're trying to specifically increase deer habitat or turkey habitat or ground birds, for example, your planting plan is going to be different, and you'll want that. Should also consider possibility, depending on how much background science you already have in the area, pre and post monitoring of stream characteristics that are impacted by that riparian buffer, water quality measures, temperature, bank stability, things of that nature. So now, once we've measured what we implemented, things start getting even harder. Really high science demand to actually quantify what the effect of that buffer is in terms of your benefit of interest, your ecosystem service of interest. Models can help, GIS analysis can help, other data analysis or synthesis. If you understand pollinators and their preferred species of plant, you can derive and quantify the effect of your planting on the increase in pollinator populations. Again, high spatial variability here. I wanted to share some of the tools that have been developed for work in the Chesapeake Bay. Our model is called the Chesapeake Assessment and Scenario Tool. It estimates nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment change in loads that result from a number of best management practices. For a lot of the agricultural practices, it also can estimate for us the carbon sequestration in terms of CO2 equivalents. It uses data from NRCS's COMET model to do that quantification. And then, you know, not everybody has models like this for, we don't have models like this for the southern watersheds of Virginia, for example. So what we try to use in place of that is kind of a semi-quantification. This BMP co-benefit impact scores. These were developed by the Bay program, but I do think that they have applicability, or at least you could develop a similar model to think about of the co-benefits, the ecosystem services that you're really interested in, which of your BMPs impact those. So this tool looked at the suite of best management practices that are being implemented throughout the Chesapeake Bay region, and a number of the outcomes and goals within the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement to figure out, okay, if we're going to implement best management practices for water quality, which of the other things that are among our list of goals and outcomes can we also influence by our selection of best management practices? Here's what that looks like, filtered down a bit, looking at some of the more common agricultural best management practices. This tool took each BMP and each of the ecosystem services that we might be interested in and gave them a score from +5 to -5. Remember, you can have negative ecosystem benefits, ecosystem effects, if you will, from an action. So not surprisingly, some of the highest scoring practices that you'll see have to do with conversion of agricultural land to forest or trees, whether that's a tree planting or a forest buffer or a stream exclusion buffer down here, stream side buffers, forest or grass. Those are some of our most beneficial practices across this suite of ecosystem services. So this can help steer you in the right direction. It is not a quantification. It cannot take you to that next step of valuation very easily, but it is a way to try and consider all of those other ecosystem services that you're interested in as you're planning your implementation. Valuation. Now, this is where it gets really difficult. This is where this is not something that we do in-house at DCR. This is work done by environmental economists along with ecologists to try and actually monetize the benefits of those ecosystem services. The monetization or valuation process are rarely directly related to the benefits that you're actually quantifying. Instead, they use things like cost avoidance. What's the benefit to preventing a flood, another flood on a residence? Sometimes values can be inferred from behaviors. For example, how much is someone willing to pay for a waterfront property above what they would pay for a similar property not on the water? Or how much is someone willing to pay for a fishing or hunting license? And presumably, if you quantify increases in wildlife populations or wildlife habitat, you can infer from that behavior a dollar value associated with that increase in population. Most often, in my experience, it's the opinion polling that is used. Folks, those interested groups are asked to value some benefit that they might derive. For example, what's it worth to you not to get gastroenteritis next time you go to the beach? Because there's been an increase or a improvement in water quality. You know, sounds like a terrible example, and sadly, you would be surprised. And when I give you the references, if you read through them, you'll find a value for this. It was surprisingly low from my perspective. It was, I think, a study back in 2013, but somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 is what somebody was willing to pay to avoid getting sick from swimming in water. So kind of crazy. Occasionally, you will have a direct measure, a market price of an ecological commodity. Carbon is the one that most folks look at here. It's an easy one to, there is a carbon market. That carbon market establishes a price per ton of CO2 equivalent. And so if you measure CO2 equivalents in carbon sequestration, it's very easy to actually get to a valuation or the value of that ecosystem service that was provided. These studies are done, as I said, they're often collaborative research type articles that may be published, and they can be really powerful marketing tools, right? One of the studies referenced down here, Phillips and McGee from 2014, estimated the economic benefits of cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay. That was actually a study paid for by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, an environmental nonprofit that's advocating for restoration of the bay. And you know, they worked with Phillips, who was an economist, and Dr. Beth McGee, who was the head of CBF, and they made an estimate that about $130 billion was the value of a restored Chesapeake Bay. But you know, part of that is what's the bay worth today in its current state, which they also calculated, and it was about $107 billion. So the change as a result of cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay would be a $22 billion per year increase or benefit. Tremendously powerful marketing tool, promotional tool. But if you look at that study, you'll see it'll immediately, you'll be able, even not being an environmental economist or an expert in this field, you can read their methods and quickly draw some criticisms. And that is because by necessity, most of these valuations are incomplete, right? It is just too hard to really put a value on an ecosystem like that. So another study that I'll also share with you is societal benefits of floodplains in the Chesapeake Bay. This one looked specifically at the benefits for nutrient and sediment trapping, as well as flood remediation by preserving and restoring headwaters floodplain areas. So it's an interesting one as well. And they went on and tried to quantify, value, monetize, however you want to think about it, those benefits of floodplains in both the Chesapeake Bay and Delaware River Basin. So that's quantifying the ecosystem service benefits we get. Part of your consideration, though, has to be what does it cost to gain those things? And I wanted to share a little bit about our annual process here in Virginia called the Agricultural Needs Assessment. Each year, we estimate the present and future costs of BMP implementation to meet our water quality goals across the state. And with that, obviously, comes a number of other ecosystem service benefits. But this is on the cost side. So we do this in collaboration with the agricultural industry and environmental nonprofits. And we publish it in a report that goes to the Virginia General Assembly each year in advance of their session. The calculator starts with our BMP implementation goals. So if you have TMDLs, for example, you can use the implementation plans for those TMDLs as a starting point. That's what we use as our Chesapeake Bay Watershed Implementation Plan. From those goals, you account for the implementation that's already occurred to date and come up with the difference. And then you estimate the costs to implement what's left to do. Hopefully, your implementation goals include a deadline, a timeline for achieving those goals. So you then divide the cost among the various sources of funding. Obviously, we all, at least here in Virginia, we run a state cost share program. So that means the producer does share a portion of the cost. We divide it up between the state cost, the federal cost, and producer cost, and account for both the cost to implement as well as the cost of technical assistance from our local soil and water conservation districts. And then we divide the cost over the remaining time horizon. We've been doing this for a number of years now, and it's been really effective. I believe it's one of the keys to our success in the program and our growth in our state cost share program. Because one, we provide it as a report to the state General Assembly, but all of those ag industry and environmental advocacy organizations also go into the General Assembly with the same number to say, here's what we need for our state agricultural cost share program this year. When they're all on the same page, it's a pretty powerful voice. So just to share what our growth has looked like as a result of this is our state investment in cost share and technical assistance funding through our soil and water conservation districts for agricultural best management practices. You can see the rapid growth this year, our program year 2026, over $250 million available this year for our soil and water districts and farmers to implement agricultural best management practices. So wanted to share that success story with you as part of this process. So I think that's my last slide, Mike. So I will throw it back to you.
All right. Appreciate it, James. I want to thank both of our presentations for today, and we're going to open it up to questions. And I'll start off with some ones that were dropped in the chat. Lillian from Connecticut has a question I was going to ask. For the Minnesota model, working with NRCS, what's needed to use that model in different states? Does it require big adjustments on the parameters? And I guess I'm also curious, do you know from your work with Troy, is this something that his colleagues in other states are working on with their state agencies and districts?
I can get started. Uday is going to pull up some of the information that we've used to parse out into the model. We've worked with people around the country on the model. So there was a contact in Fort Worth, Texas, that was sort of a modeling, like he was the in-plan go-to person, right? Or he was a subject matter expert at least. So I know that this is a national based model. I don't actually know if it's proprietary to NRCS or not. And I'm not sure if it's terribly important, because it was something that they got support to do through MA, or the local state association, and we got, he assigned some staff to help out with it, and it took a little bit of time. So there is a relationship there with NRCS. They have to make some decisions about, how they divvy up the time. And then there's a commitment on our side too. To get the data aggregated, we went through all of the individual counties, soil and water conservation districts. We went through their financial reports and built a spreadsheet of data based on each of them individually, and then collectively shared that out.
So this model actually, it is from a private company, and NRCS buys a license for it. There is a name of the company, is just slipping out of my mind, who prepared this model, and this is being used not only by NRCS, but there are many other applications of this one. So if you guys can see my screen, this is what the summary, I tried not to, hopefully this will give you guys a little bit of a better idea. I thought my mouse was here, but I disconnected it. So each county, from their financial data, so let's say, so this is the counties we have, and then we go intergovernmental. So this is the sources, as we were talking, that this is not only for the state as well as county funding. And this was one of the reason, this Minnesota Association of SWCD was having a hard time convincing the county officials, like why this conservation was important, and then why should they also fund it or supply the funding. So like a state fund is like 1.2 million for that Anoka County, and this much is from this is from the state and this is from the county. And then obviously there are a lot of, sometimes people have some goods and services, as well as, they have some rental incomes or product sale. And so this is what comes as a total revenue. And then we look at the expenditure, which, these are the categories. Now, from this data, then the implant folks derive certain assumptions. They take like, okay, how much of this money, like direct cost or indirect cost, project expenses, whether they are for equipments or they are already putting for project into the ground. So they take all of these categories. So if you see then the expenditure, they're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 categories. And then income, we just, in fact, in the 2021 analysis, the local and regional were always combined. For 2023, I tried to see if how many counties have this one, and I don't even know the exact definition of what local and regional means. It could be, multiple counties helping each other, some shared services. But I only found Anoka County because it's a more of right at the outskirts of the Twin Cities. So it is a more urban / rural county. So, and that's why we made sure that all of this data comes from. I had to go through the auditor's report, financial report that gets submitted from each of the SWCDs. They are given a standard format. So now in the future, we are hoping that if we can get their Excel spreadsheet, we only get a PDF, and then Cameron and myself can write some macros and just with a click of button, we just provide the summary and then do this analysis. So I think the implant model itself, the per year cost is pretty expensive. This is not a cheap model. Some of these models, like in our stormwater management, we use XP Swim. The one license is like $15,000 a year. An implant is same way, but the NRCS is a federal agency, and they have shared services, and that's how they use it.
So, but to obtain this data for SWCDs, you really had to work through your state association and have them help obtain county data for you.
No, it is because SWCDs are administered by the Board of Water and Soil Resources. So it is required by each SWCD to give us the financial report at the end of each year. So they report to us. and we have that all the financial data.
To your point though, Mike, if that's a statutory directive for SWCDs to report that to those financial reports to us. So if your state doesn't have that, you would need to collect it somehow.
And most of the places is a public information, though SWCDs also have it on their web page as well. But for us, it is part of the requirements. And I can even show you an example here.
Well, I'm going to move over to some other questions because we got
go ahead.
Lewis. And so I'm going to jump to a question for Virginia from John from Michigan. James, what are the BMP implementation goals based on? Acres or number of practices to be implemented, load reductions, and also how were they determined?
Yeah. So the implementation goals in Virginia are based on our Chesapeake Bay Watershed Implementation Plan. And that plan was developed specifically to identify the BMPs, the best management practices that are needed in order to meet our Chesapeake Bay nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment reduction goals. Those BMPs are across all sectors: agriculture, developed, septic, wastewater the wastewater sector has goals as well. For our cost estimates, we're focused on the agricultural best management practices. And depending on the practice, they're all measured in some form of units. Many are in acres, right? Acres of cover crop or acres of buffer, fence, livestock exclusion fencing, for example, might be in linear feet or number of livestock excluded. And some of the animal waste types of practices would be measured in animal units or treated by that system or something along those lines. But each BMP has its unique units, but there are none that just use a count. So it's always the implementation units of the particular practice.
Sounds good. The question from Minnesota on your indirect and leverage dollars. Do you have an idea of those sources for leverage funds, federal versus local?
Let me see if I have my, oh, you disabled my share. So we do have leverage funds even from local unit of non-profit organizations. So mostly it's a state, federal, and then counties. So, and then sometimes some of these SWCs are able to use the state funding as a leverage fund to apply for other grants from like Pheasant Forever or Nature Conservancy. So it all depends upon, in each SWCD is who is the staff and how much experience they have. And sometimes even some of the SWCD also try to apply to the LCCMR, which is Legislative Commission, Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources as well. So let me see if I can again share the.
While you're pulling that up, Uday, I can just add, some of that comes through in their financial reports. You can delineate the lines between the different sources of funding that they have that comes in. That's, whether it's state resources or other resources. The other thing that was really helpful with having NRCS involved is that they had a lot of their data. So we were leveraging each other, obviously. So they were able to bring in some of their cost share numbers and some of those other factors that are coming from the federal side. And then we're incorporating some of those local numbers, as well as our statewide numbers. So we track that as well. We've got the grant information on our side, and so we've got data sets that we can pull from.
Super. Any other questions for our two presenters today? Either unmute or drop that in the chat. Obviously, this topic is very timely. I think for many of our members in conservation in general, we're looking to communicate the work being done and the value that has to communities and also across our partnership. But this is good stuff. And again, this will be on our YouTube channel soon. And I believe both for Minnesota and Virginia, contact information. It's okay if folks want to follow up with either of you if they have further questions.
I would say that's probably a good idea, actually. This is a hard topic to cover with a big group, right? Because if you get too deep into numbers, we can start losing people really fast. But the details are important for the level of work and the amount of data that you just have to sort of put together or have have to go looking for. So yeah, please reach out. We're happy to chat with folks
And just
or
quick
learn more
question.
about what others are doing too.
Yeah, quick question just popped in. If a state was to start this, what are the tips to get going? What do you recommend in launching this?
So I think the biggest thing will be to reach out to your local NRCS office and see if they have an economist on their staff. And if not, you can go to your neighboring state, or like, I can provide you our Minnesota economist information. And they're a good group of people, and they stay current with each other because they learn from each other a lot. So let me see if I can get you Sam's email here in chat.
And James, what would you recommend on your side?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for an economist, you can also look to your state land grant university. They likely have environmental economists and other social scientists on staff that could help you get started. But if you're a state just getting started, my advice to you would be to have some meetings with your key stakeholder groups, figure out what it is they're interested in measuring, and then work collaboratively with them to identify goals and start figuring out what data you need to capture and track in order to realize that. Laying out a solid plan up front is always a good idea in my experience.
And James, you mentioned that in your talk as far as having the same set of data, the same numbers to communicate to policymakers and the community. How did you decide who fit into that as far as stakeholders, the people that you want to engage and get on the same page?
Yeah. So here in Virginia, we have a few key environmental nonprofits. Chesapeake Bay Foundation, one I mentioned, as well as agribusiness groups. Farm Bureau Foundation is huge, an important one. The Agribusiness Council, your various producer groups, whether it's Poultry Federation or Dairymen's Association, things of that sort. All are important. Our program is a water quality focused program and agriculture focused. So that helped us narrow our choices somewhat. There's tons of environmental NGOs, but there's a few, mainly watershed organizations, that are focused on water quality as our program is. So that was the basis for setting up our stakeholder group.
Sounds good. I guess Minnesota, do you have any final words to leave us with from your work?
Hey, Mike, somehow my message, one of the messages I was sending directly to Clancy. So now I'm not able to switch to message to everyone. So maybe Clancy Green can put that message that went to her into the everyone chat. So I have Sam's contact information there. I'll send it to you, and then you can send the email to everyone.
Yeah,
I'll put it in your email, Mike.
Very good. Well, I want to thank both states, Minnesota and Virginia, for presenting some good information. And I think that this is a topic we'll probably revisit from NASCA. The next NASCA webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, October 22nd. I encourage you to look for announcements for that in our newsletter on the website. But I thank everybody again for attending today and hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.